Moomoo Farm is a wonderful paradise where Miltank graze the fields in happy joy, and man, the milk is cost efficient. It heals 100 HP, which is almost as much as a hyper potion, but I get the impression that behind the jubilant facade of Moomoo Farms is something much darker. When you head to Route 210, just north of Silesian Town, and go to the Mountain Cabin Maid Cafe, and look into the eyes of the maids, there's only darkness that looks back. Now, I don't actually think that there's some Moomoo conspiracy. However, it does remain the case that any line of work involving the commercial use of animals is going to run into ethical problems. The Moomoo farmers I've talked to don't want their Miltanks to herd. They're not trying to torture them. They just have a job to do. And it's an ecosystem. And nature is red in tooth and claw. But because I know that the Moomoo farmers actually do care about the well-being of their Miltank, I want to make a positive argument. I want to provide an option for the future that we could build towards that would make everyone's lives better in the Miltank farming industry. That option is, of course, lobotomizing every Miltank so that they can't think or feel at all. I'm going to make the case that this is not only a morally good thing to do, it's good to cut open your cow's head, destroy the brain, and keep the body living as a kind of vegetable. But I'm going to argue that it's a moral imperative. I think that everyone should be doing this right now. I understand why we're not, right? We don't have the technology. But I think we should be probably devoting all of our money, all of our Poké dollars, to immediately creating this new technology, which is the Miltank lobotomizer. I think that it could be revolutionary, and I think that by the end of this video, you'll agree with me that it is the pure, morally just thing to strive towards. Now, I admit it's a shocking idea. If you're in the audience thinking, what the heck, I don't want to lobotomize Miltank. Like, they've got lives and families and people they love, other Miltank they love, and, you know, maybe they look over the fence and they see like a Tauros, and they're like, you know, that maybe they want to build a life together and have a family. You're just going to lobotomize them and take all that away? Yeah, well, my case hinges on the fact that for a Miltank, the lack of experience is not a bad thing in the same way as the experience of intense suffering. There's an argument that I foresee the Moomoo Farms establishment making, which is that, like, it's not so bad, the day-to-day of being a Moomoo Miltank. Like, you get a lot of good grass to feed, you're kept healthy, you're given medication, like, you get to live a full life. Yeah, you get milked. You get milked every day. But, like, you kind of like being milked. Like, it's ambiguous whether being milked is, like, a bad thing if you're a Miltank. And I'm kind of willing to concede it. I think that if all farms operated like Moomoo Farms, then maybe I wouldn't be making this case right now. Yeah, the problem is there are an awful lot of farms that don't have humane conditions, right? They are Miltank pressed into tight quarters, like little pens. You know, they're never going to see a Tauros in their life. They're just stuck in that thing. They're just fed super potions, like, every day, just sprayed with super potions. They never faint. Some of them will get poisoned. They'll just be left without antidotes. They'll get burned and just be left with a burn. Just hyper potion, whatever. If you feed a Miltank its own milk back, then it's never going to die of poison, unless it's toxic poison. But if it's just normal poison, it's losing 12% of its health each turn, well, you can just feed it its own milk and it will heal back up, and then it can live in this state of kind of perpetual poison. And I know that no Moomoo farmers are going to confess to doing this, because that sounds horrendous. And I don't think that when it does happen, it's out of, like, sadistic joy. But I think it just happens as a result of large-scale commercial farming. And it is kind of a problem. And if you're a Miltank in that situation, I can see how you'd prefer not to be in that situation. So that's my bet hedging. I will now make my case. Abel here just brought me a rat. He dumped a rat on my floor, and I had to pick it up, and it's weird picking up a dead animal. It's kind of squishy in a way that, like, a living creature isn't. Like, when I touch Abel, all his muscles are kind of working properly. His fluid-filled cavity is full of its proper fluid. But when you pick up a dead rat, it's, like, kind of horrendous. So anyway, I picked up the dead rat, and I thought about, like, dissecting it or something, because I'm a biologist, but I was like, no, I don't need to dissect this one. So I went and put it in the bushes to hopefully attract some other cats who need food, or possums that need food, or feral children who need food. All of those are viable use cases for a dead rat. Now, I should, before we go any further, talk a little bit about my own ethical philosophy, just so that you know where I stand, you know where my biases are, because I do have pretty strong biases on this topic. I think I'm right. Like, I think my biases are legit, but if you compare them to, like, the average person, I'm probably kind of decently radical. So, I am a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian for a few years now. When I was a kid, I didn't eat meats that looked too much like a real animal because it kind of didn't sit right with me, but I would happily eat a sausage or a piece of salami. If it was sufficiently processed, then I was like, yum yum, but I didn't want to eat like a chicken drumstick. I didn't like the thought of eating a bird. But I've been completely vegetarian for a few years, which means that if you're a meat lover, you might hate me. But I'm not a vegan. Well, I don't have milk. I just occasionally have an egg, a chicken egg. And so I'm not like a true vegan. Also, I don't like stress test my medications or my clothing or anything. Like, I'm not a true vegan. So the vegans will hate me. But that's okay. I'm not coming at this from like a diehard vegan perspective, but I'm very, very sympathetic to veganism. I don't want to pick a fight with a vegan because they'll definitely win. Like I think that there are complications and there's nuance and there's this weird thing that we do with blame as humans. But at the end of the day, like I don't have moral ground to stand on by eating an egg. You know, maybe it's fine. But I don't have like any positive justification for it. I don't have like reasons why I should eat an egg. I only have kind of fairly meaningless, oh, an egg tastes nice and it's good for you. But like other things taste nice and other things are good for you too. So I don't think that's a very good argument. Whereas the vegan has a huge number of very, very valid reasons to not like the idea of using any animal products that I'm not at all willing to fight them on. I'm happy to just concede them. So I'm very, very sympathetic to veganism. But in particular, I'm sympathetic to a Peter Singer-style utilitarian veganism. And that's mostly because I'm not willing to believe in rights as a kind of feature of reality, like reaching out and touching things. Feature of reality. I don't think that there actually exists a thing called a right. I think a right is just a human category that we make up that reflects our preferences. But that's going to get me some slack. Because what that means is I'm not willing to say it's wrong to kill an animal for food. I'm not willing to commit to that. I'm not willing to say it's wrong to kill a human and eat them for food. But that's not because I don't think it's bad. It's because I don't believe in like wrongness and rightness as these inalienable categories. I don't buy Kant's thing because I'm too much of a nihilist and too much of an empiricist. However, I know that there are some vegans out there who will see me as a massive enemy. So I've brought on a guest. Now you remember I said that Abel here killed a rat. Well, the mascot of this channel for a while was the ethical retata, and now that I have a lovely rat companion, let me just get it from over here. I know, it's like freaky. It's a freaky decision that I've made doing this. There you go. It's the ethical retata. I'm not actually going to wave around a rat corpse live on camera. I did consider it. I considered it, but I ultimately rejected it because it's bad vibes to just wave a dead thing around and like puppeteer it. Now, you might say, Henry, that doesn't look... This sock puppet looks absolutely nothing like a rat. I mean, it doesn't even look like an animal. You can see it's kind of got a tongue, but you can't really tell. And it's got googly eyes, and it says Thursday on the back of it. You might say, well, how is that a rat? Well, it was once a rat, but it was horribly disfigured in 2024 during what is now known as the washing machine incident. Here's a picture of me. I'll put it up here. Here's a picture of me, probably, with the ethics rat in its prime. Anyway, the ethics rat's here because I need an interlocutor for my Socratic dialogue. And the ethics rat's perspective is kind of like mine. We agree that, like, harming animals is bad, but the ethics rat isn't willing. I've got like weasel ethics. I think that like, well, harming animals is bad, but like I can come up with reasons when it's like okay, and I'm willing to concede that like there are times when it's good and there's lots of different factors to weigh up. The ethics rat doesn't say that. The ethics rat says, Henry, like shut up. Killing things is wrong. Can't you see that killing things is wrong? Eating things that were sentient because you like the taste of them is just unjustifiable. Like we don't need to like do some sophistry and quibble on the details. It's just wrong. Okay, so that's what the ethics rat thinks. I kind of disagree. I'm kind of like, well, you know, maybe we can come up with some compromise. Maybe we can all work together. I'll leave it to you to decide whether I'm being too cowardly or the ethics rat's being too dogmatic. That's my bias. As I said, what we're building towards is an argument for the lobotomization of Miltanks on Moomoo Farm. I think we should begin with the concept of pain. What does it mean to be in pain? There's an interesting thing that I've noticed talking to scientists sometimes, where they'll say, oh, I wonder if animals feel pain. And when they say that, I have this really instinctual, like, are you evil? I don't think they're evil. I'm not saying they're evil, but I kind of feel it. I'm like, Are you saying that, like, Abel doesn't feel pain? Do you feel pain? Yeah. Do you feel pain? Do you want to be lobotomized? No, you don't want to be lobotomized. Yeah, I thought you felt pain. Abel says he feels pain. But there is reason to question, because it's very, very hard to prove that something feels pain, because we don't have any way of proving any kind of experiential sensations at all. This is where you get the classic, what if the red that I see looks like green to you? What if my colors are just different to yours? We'd have no way of ever knowing, because I can use language to express what I'm seeing, but I am just seeing it. And the reason for that, I think, is that color isn't a real thing. A photon moving at a particular wavelength is a real thing, but like the color that I experience, the color, like the redness of this thing, or the deepness of my voice, or the spiciness of my F. Whitlock and Sons Fuego Chili killer beans, those aren't empirically observable things. Those aren't real, right? That hallucinations created by my brain and my sensory organs to compel me to act in certain ways, right? I taste the spicy killer beans and I think, yum, I'll have some more spicy killer beans tomorrow. I drink some Moomoo Milk, right? I restore 100 HP and I think, oh my god, I can't wait to lobotomize another cow tomorrow. Like, that sounds wonderful. But then what about pain? Like, if I was bitten by a rat, I would feel the pain more viscerally than anything, but it's not exactly real. The question for scientists isn't just, can animals feel pain, but how can I, as a scientist, prove that I feel pain? And so, moreover, how can you, the viewer, like, believe that I, the Parasitoid Pod, how can you believe that I feel pain, right? I can tell you I feel pain. I can say, ouch. I can say, that really hurts. Stop sawing off my arm or something. But you don't feel that pain. You have no way to feel that pain, no matter what you do. So if you were to try to cut my hand off, that would cause me immense distress. I would be in terrible, terrible pain. I would want nothing more than to avoid the pain and stop the pain. I would say, take my firstborn child, take my favorite wasp, like, stop cutting my hand off. And you might say, okay, but like, how do I know that you're actually feeling pain? This isn't just like a prank. I'd say, okay, look, if you look at my cells where you're currently soaring, I have these nociceptors. And what a nociceptor does is it registers a harmful stimulus, in this case the saw cutting back and forth along my wrist, and it sends a neural message to the brain saying, I don't like this. Like, I would prefer this wasn't happening. And the brain says, oh, okay, I'm going to feel a bit bad about this, so that my consciousness, my animal being, tries to avoid it in the future. It's trying to induce some kind of behavioral thing. And you can see my nociceptors firing and firing, and you can draw a correlation between the number of them that are firing and the amount of pain that I claim to be in. So if you trigger more of my nociceptors, I say I'm in more pain. That suggests I'm in pain, right? Then I can do this thing where I say, and you and I are the same. We might not be exactly the same, but we're pretty close. We have almost identical genetic structure. We're both human, Homo sapiens people. And you have nociceptors like I do. And if I were to trigger your nociceptors in the same way that you're triggering mine by sawing my hand off, you would experience the pain. And so we would have this analogous pain sensation, right? We'd both be in pain. And so that's proof that I'm in pain. And you might be happy with that. You're like, well, yeah, like, he seems to be in pain. He's screaming, he's wailing, there's blood all going everywhere. Like, it seems bad. It makes evolutionary sense why, as an animal, you'd want to avoid letting your hand get chopped off. Like, that's a bad thing. Biochemistry should be going into overdrive trying to stop it so that it doesn't happen, because it's going to really lower your fitness in the future. So it all kind of adds up. Now, the average animal that you meet on the street also has nociceptors. If you're a bird, if you're a mammal, you've got these same pain-triggering neurons that are linked to your brain. So, case closed, right? Like, we can do the same thing. Well, the animal wails and screams when I try to cut off its leg, and its nociceptors are triggering, and so when I wail and scream, like, so I know that the animal feels pain. But the animal can't tell you that it's in pain except by wailing and screaming, which, to me, is pretty good evidence that it's in pain, but some people want more. The problem is, as we get further away evolutionarily, it becomes harder and harder to understand what the experience of being an animal is like. If you think about being a chimp, right, you can kind of more or less assume that it's pretty similar to being a human. You know, maybe you have different priorities and you aren't so invested in like the minutiae of Pokemon, but you're going to have the same feelings, right? You're going to have happinesses and sadnesses, and you're going to feel love and you're going to feel pain, because these are very like instinctual features. That seems very obvious to me, but it's not obvious to a lot of people. And in fact, some people have the opposite intuition. They think, well, no, I think humans are kind of special and it's something to do with our cognitive power, our ability to, you know, do math and read and stuff. That gives us the experience, makes the experience really hit. It doesn't seem very plausible to me. It seems like intelligence is kind of like a thing that's happened to be pretty boosted in our stat spread, but these base instincts are also very strong, and there's no reason to expect they wouldn't be conserved. But okay, like, we can go out, like, we can say a bird. What's it like being a bird? Well, it's probably quite different to being a human. You've got a different kind of vision, different social impulses. I mean, even being a cat or a dog is probably quite different to being a human, because you have this sense of smell and you're getting all these sensations that I as a human can't even imagine. But it's probably not that different to being a human still. Like, it's still a mammal, still pretty close. And then, you know, we can go further out. What if you were a lobster? What if you were a parasitoid wasp? In that case, what does it mean to experience something? They've got brains. We can assume that they do have an experiential thing going on. They've got nociceptors, so we think they feel pain. But how do we know what that means to a crab? Right? Like, if I was a lobster and I was in pain, it could be that being in pain for a lobster, the sensation they get is the same sensation I get when I drink milk, which is like, oh, milk, that's pretty good. It's just that sensation triggers in their mind an intense aversion. It's like the taste of milk is utterly revolting to the lobster. They drink the milk. They experience the same taste, like it's that milky taste, but it doesn't make them feel good. It makes them feel horrendous. They want to avoid milk. They don't want to drink it ever, except they're not drinking milk. What they're doing is like being cut open. Which leads me to my next point. It's convenient for science to think that animals don't feel pain. An example of this is crustaceans. So it used to be okay in New Zealand to just cut open a lobster or boil it alive and watch what happened to it. But that's not okay anymore, because we think that actually they feel intense pain, and so what we were doing when we were doing that was torturing them. But what you can do is those same things to like a small shrimp, because shrimp, we haven't proven that they feel pain. So in the meanwhile, it's okay to torture them. That's kind of where we stand ethically. But as you can see from my kind of rambling, I can't do a very good job of proving to you that lobsters feel pain. All I can say is kind of, well, probably, like, we should probably assume that they do. I can't prove it to you. And it's not because it's not true, it's because it's hard to imagine what the proof would even look like. Like, I suspect the proof would be something like if you could connect their neural web to your own. I think about this sometimes. Our brain is a closed system, right? Like, we have information stored in here, and it can communicate with other information, and it can communicate with the body, but it can't communicate with another person. What that means is that you, the viewer, and me, the speaker, are mutually isolated, right? I mean, obviously, like, I can't experience what it's like to be you, but that doesn't mean that we're not doing the same thing at the same time, in a way that if we could connect our information, like let one brain read the other brain, we would just experience being both of us. It's not clear that there's actually that much separation between living things, except that, like, well, of course, there's a physical barrier between my information and yours. I feel like if you could kind of get like I'm imagining like a string of artificial neurons that could relay information forward and back between your brain and the lobster's, then maybe you could understand it, but it would be in a sense like you'd experience being both yourself and the lobster simultaneously, which could be highly disturbing. Anyway, that's my sci-fi technology I've been thinking about. But it doesn't exist, and without it, I really can't prove to you that lobsters feel pain. If you want to reject that assumption, I think we're both going to be a bit unsatisfied. The philosopher Descartes of I think, therefore I am fame also famously thought that animals didn't have an experience. They were like robots. They kind of reacted as if they felt pain, but there was no experience of being the animal. And so he tortured the animals. Well, hang on, isn't that kind of what a philosophical zombie is? Yes. So Descartes thought that animals were philosophical zombie animals. If you're not into the weeds of ethics, ethical philosophy, a philosophical zombie is a creature, it's a human that looks like a human and responds like a human in every way, such that you can't tell it's not a human, but it doesn't have an experience of being a human. There's no internal thing going on. This is often used in thought experiments, like would it be wrong to hurt a philosophical zombie? Is it possible for a philosophical zombie to exist? Like, is it a kind of coherent idea? Probably not, but it's interesting, I think, to think about the ways in which it becomes incoherent. Now, I don't think that animals are philosophical zombies. I think that animals are having an experience of life that is not the same as ours, but it's an experience. You know, they do dumb things, they make mistakes, they try things, they kind of think about things and then they try it. I mean, I've seen Abel like think about so many jumps where he's trying to jump from that rickety shelf onto my face, and he's like there and he's like, oh, can I do it? You can see it in his eyes. He's like, maybe I could do it, but I'm gonna like knock a whole bunch of stuff off the shelf, but I don't really mind knocking a whole bunch of stuff off the shelf, so I guess we're gonna make the leap. And then he jumps on me and I'm like, oh my god, Abel, why would you do that? And he's like, whoops, I didn't know it was gonna end up like that. I thought it was gonna end differently. I guess premise 1, animals are not philosophical zombies, they have experience. Okay, premise 2, suffering is bad, actually. That's my premise. It's not good to suffer. We shouldn't cause people to suffer. Now, this is a utilitarian premise, basically. I'm basically saying, look, it's good to feel good and it's bad to feel bad. But I want to make it clear that I don't think it's sort of objectively bad. I just think it's subjectively bad. So in my subjective sense, it's bad to suffer. I would not like to suffer. And I don't like the idea of other things that are subjects of their lives suffering. However, I don't think it's like bad in absence of some subject, or from the point of view of a different subject. I like to think about parasitoid morality. It's a term that I've coined that means the moral intuitions and base beliefs of a parasitoid. If I were a parasitoid, if my life cycle, rather than, going diploid, sexual thing, haploid, gamete, zygote, embryo, baby, child, Henry. Rather than that, if it was like I had to go find a host, maybe I was a cow parasitoid, I had to go lay some eggs under the skin of a cow, and then the eggs would hatch into little, like, babies that were like this big, but they looked like human babies, and the human babies would gnaw on the cow's innards until the cow died, and then they'd chew their way out of the ribcage and stick their heads out, and you'd see like 60 little baby heads all sticking out of the back of the dead cow, and then they climbed out and they entered their pupal phase, where they turned into a blob of sort of embryonic goop, and then they exited their pupal phase as a beautiful, radiant adult Henry. If that were my life cycle, what would I think about killing, right? Imagine if I did that to other people, because there are parasitoids that parasitize other parasitoids. If I were the super parasitoid of other humans, would I think that killing was wrong? Would I think that murder was wrong? Would I think that cannibalism was wrong? I don't think I would, because I would have no evolutionary incentive to feel those ways. In fact, I would think, oh, it's like kind of good. Like, I kind of like it. If you're a parasitoid wasp, it's not just that you probably don't have a moral paradigm about harming other bugs or caterpillars. In fact, you probably can't ever evolve one, because you need to be biologically incentivized to keep doing your parasitism. So you're just going to think, no, parasitism is great. Like, it's good. And the suffering that it causes in the caterpillars is good too. Like, I like that. That makes me happy. And so I'm not saying that suffering is always wrong from everyone's point of view, but it is from mine, and I think that's kind of important. And it probably is from yours too, because you're probably also a real human. And I think from most humans, it's going to be true that suffering is wrong. There are reasons to suffer, and there are reasons that you might want to make other people suffer. The famous one is the dentist. No one really likes going to the dentist, but you got to go to the dentist. I should go to the dentist. I've been putting it off because it's expensive. You got to go to the dentist. But it kind of sucks. It's kind of a kind of suffering, but it's going to save you from a greater suffering. So we do it. It's okay to make your children go to the dentist, even though they hate going to the dentist, because it's for their own good, right? We're kind of conceding that suffering is sometimes okay. So yeah, suffering is sometimes okay, but like I think that like suffering that's like being bludgeoned to death probably is not okay. That's probably like really bad. I apologize for this being incoherent. I'm just doing this off the cuff. I have no script. It's just my live thoughts about this. It's the kind of thing that's just on your mind some days, you know? You just kind of think, what do I think about lobotomizing Miltank? Is that moral? And you're like, well, if I was a vegan, maybe it would be. So my 2 points are suffering is bad, and animals experience suffering. So not just they suffer, but they have an experience of suffering. My next point is that the experience of being a Miltank in a factory mumu farm is mostly suffering. Maybe there's some joy in it, but it's not a good life. It's it's not the kind of life that I would want to live. Now, I'm not saying that we should go into these farms and like eliminate all of the already living Miltank. I mean, if we can give them a better home, we should, and if we can save them from their torture racks, then that would be good. But even if the better home was like a nice green pasture farm, like that would be a much improved over the kind of like nightmare scenarios that some of these Miltanks are in. It's kind of like a Derek Parfit style person who doesn't exist yet problem, an identity problem. So if I say, I think it's bad to have malaria, like having malaria is bad, and I want to eliminate people having malaria, you might say, hang on, you want to eliminate people with malaria? Like they already have it pretty bad. You want to you want to end it? And I will say, no, I don't want to get rid of the current people who have malaria. Like I want to help them. I want to make it so that no future people have malaria. And you might say, well, why do you hate the future people with malaria? Like surely they also, you should care about them. And I'm like, no, it's not that I don't care about the future people with malaria. It's that I want there to be those people, but just without the malaria. And you could say, okay, but like, if you get rid of the malaria, that's going to have a bunch of ripple effects on the world, which will mean that there will be people without malaria, but there'll be different people, probably. Like, little butterfly effect things will happen, and different kids will be born, and you'll have different people. So what you've done isn't just like, get rid of malaria. You've gotten rid of the people with malaria and replaced them with a different set of people who don't have malaria. And I'll say, I don't know, like, that sounds a bit sci-fi. Like, I think I just want to get rid of malaria. And you're like, you're evil. Like, how dare you? We need to keep malaria, because otherwise there'll be no more people with malaria. And I'll be like, okay, don't know why I'm arguing this point, because that sounds kind of crazy. But it's a similar situation to what we're seeing with the farms, where if I say, I want to get rid of Miltank in, if not all farms, then at least like inhumane factory Miltank farms. You might say, okay, but those Miltank don't have another life, right? Like, if you didn't have those factory farms, it's not like there would be those Miltank out in the field. Like, it's either they have that factory farm or they don't exist. Like, they were never bred into existence. And then I'll say, okay, fine, I'll concede all that. I think that it's okay not to create things that will exist, right? Like, it's okay to choose not to make something that could be alive. I think that has to be okay, because otherwise we would be doing a really bad thing all the time by not making sure there is just as much living sentient biomass on the planet as possible through whatever means necessary. Like just breeding things all the time, having thousands of children, like we'd just be like, it's okay to like not create life, because before a new life is created, it can't object to not being created. It's a very, very different question, I think, after someone exists, to say, oh, we wish you didn't exist, versus saying we're going to stop this person existing in the first place. But it's not like a simple question, right? Because I think there are decent cases to be made that there are times when it can be really dodgy to decide that a type of person, a type of life, isn't going to exist because you think it's bad. It's fraught, right? The idea is fraught and complicated. If you can prevent a type of suffering by preventing a suffering category of individuals from existing, it's not a bad idea to do that. In fact, it's a good idea. Like, we should try to prevent groups of individuals from suffering if they don't exist yet. And I think that the more suffering we can prevent, the better the thing would be doing it. So if we prevented all the suffering of the Miltank, like we got rid of all the problems, gave them nice lives, didn't murder them, then that would be kind of like the best option. But the ethical rat's not going to like this. We'll bring the ethical rat back. He hasn't really had much to say, but he's got something to say now. And the ethical rat's going to say, Henry, that's crazy. Because what you're saying is that it would be good to still torment them, but torment them a bit less. Like you said, it's a good thing. Right now, you think it's bad. Okay, they're in these torture devices. Well, what if we gave them like a day off each week where they got to go outside and frolic, and then 6 days of the week they were kept inside and not fed anything but gruel and, milked every morning? Are you saying that would be good? And I'm kind of going to be like, well, I don't know if it would be good, but it would be better. Like, I would like them to do that. I mean, it's not ideal. I would still like them to do more. But I kind of do think it would be better than the current situation. And the ethical rat's saying, no, that's insane, right? There's something happening here. These sentient, feeling creatures are having their rights violated. These creatures have a right not to be harmed, and as long as you're violating the right, it's just bad. Like, it doesn't matter, oh, you're doing a little bit less rights violation. No, the problem is, you're doing it at all. Like, we can't, like, compromise on this. Because, like, by your own logic, if the starting conditions have been twice as bad to begin with, then you might say, Henry, that the current situation is actually good, because it's better than what it could be. And I'd be like, well, yeah, like, it could be worse. It could be worse. I at least don't think the current system is, like, intentionally, maximally torturing these Miltank. And in some cases, it's actually given them pretty good lives. And the rat says, okay, but it's still a fundamental violation of a right. And I'm kind of like, well, yeah, but like a right isn't really a real thing. And there are things like, how could you say that, right? The ethical rat wants to say that the thing that would be good to do has nothing to do with these incremental improvements. We simply have a duty not to harm and cause pain to living things. And every time we do that, in any capacity, it's wrong. Like, that's, the ethical rat just thinks that's obvious. I'm gonna go, like, just, like, punch an elephant in the forearm, the foreleg, in the trunk, and you're gonna be like, oh, well, that's not that bad. Like, it could be worse. You could be causing twice as much pain. Like, no, it's just wrong. We're kind of in disagreement here. But we both agree, at least, I think, ethical retardo, that, like, you shouldn't kill and eat an animal for no reason. Well, I mean, I think that, says the ethical retardo. I don't know if you do, though. I mean, you eat eggs. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but, like, am I not doing some kind of good? Like, I don't eat any of the other meats, and I'm not drinking the milk. I'm just eating the eggs. And the rat says, okay, but you're still violating the rights of a chicken by, stealing its egg. And I'm like, I know that, like, they just send the baby boy chickens into the chicken grinder so they don't have to exist. And I agree that's horrendous. But, like, am I not doing something? Am I not kind of trying? Does it not count for anything that I'm, like, making some steps? And the rat's going to say, no. Like, it doesn't. You don't get, like, pity points for being less evil than you could be. It's like, you're either breaching a right, in which case I'm going to criticize you for breaching a right, or you're not, in which case we cool. But we're not cool. So that's kind of where we differ on this scenario, which means that the ethical rat vehemently disagrees with me about the lobotomization. So let's talk about my actual plan to reduce suffering in a Miltank slaughterhouse. The problem of pain comes from these pesky nociceptors that I mentioned earlier. They send harmful signals to the brain of the Miltank, which then experiences the signals as immense suffering. Fortunately, an adult cow can weigh as much as 500 kilograms, and an adult cow's brain only weighs like half a kilogram. So the brain is only like 0.1% of the edible material of the cow. If we just got rid of it, then the cow wouldn't experience all the suffering, and we'd still get to eat most of the cow. So why not, right? Why not just, whenever a baby cow is born, maybe through gene modification, maybe through old-fashioned means, just remove its ability to think. Keep it alive, keep it on, like, life support, or force feed it, keep its metabolism going, but just, like, put it in a coma. Make it just unable to have any kind of conscious experience for its entire existence. That way, there is no suffering, right? That Miltank is not suffering. It's not feeling anything at all. It doesn't have an experience. You've cut its experience off at the source. Those nociceptors aren't firing, or if they are, when they hit the brain, they don't cause a response in the brain. In that case, how can it be wrong to kill and eat the cow later? You might say, okay, but, like, Henry, you wouldn't like it if someone came to you and lobotomized you so you didn't have any experience. And to that I'd say, you're right. I don't think we should lobotomize adult Miltank. I think that once you have been a conscious individual, you have reason to object to losing that consciousness. However, if you've never been a conscious individual in the first place, like, for example, a hypothetical future person with malaria, then it's hard to say that you have the same reason to not be lobotomized. Like, you don't have the desire to keep your brain, to keep your experience, because you don't exist yet. And the only time you're ever going to exist, by my plan, is after lobotomization. So, like, you're never going to exist in a moment where you have the thought that you want to not exist. Now, the ethical rat's going to come in and say, Henry, that's the most insane, murderous, maniacal thing I've ever heard anybody say, these beings have the right not to be modified in that way. Like, they just have that right. It's just wrong to do that to someone. You wouldn't do that to a person, would you? And I'm like, well, if I'm saying that Miltank are analogous to humans in other ways, I have to concede that, like, I do it to a person. So I'm like, biting the bullet. I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to say, yeah, ethical rat. If I wanted to eat a human for meat, then I would lobotomize them as an infant, so that they didn't have to feel the pain of the torture farm I was going to keep them in until I killed them to eat them. And the ethical rat was going to say, why are you putting infant children into murder farms? I'm going to say, I'm not. I'm doing it to Miltank. Ethical rat's going to say, why are you doing it to Miltank? I'm going to say, I'm not. But everyone else is. And so I want to help, right? I'm not personally involved, but because it's something that we're doing as a people, I want to help. And so I want to lobotomize all the Miltank. And the ethical right is going to say, you sound like a maniac. To go into them, to violate their sort of sovereignty over their own self is outrageous. Like, that creature that you create might not know why it doesn't have an experience, because it doesn't have an experience. But if it could have had an experience, it would want to. And this is where I come in with my kind of coup de grace. What about plants? Now, what about plants is going to send all the vegans into a kind of trauma response. Because you hear it a lot as a vegan. It's one of the common things. People will say, oh, you're so pure. You're happy to just cut up and eat plants, right? You hear this a lot. I mean, you hear it a lot as a vegetarian. It's obviously dumb because, as all vegans know, the point is that plants don't have nociceptors. And they don't have brains. So they don't have any experience. Now, I'm a little skeptical of that claim because they don't have neurons. They don't have animal-style nociceptors. But they do have very complicated signaling pathways. In many cases, their signaling chemical pathways are much more complicated than animals because the only way they have to deal with things is by making modifications to themselves. So a plant can't move out of the way of danger. What they can do is decide to make every cell in a leaf undergo necrosis simultaneously to kill the leaf to save the plant. They can decide to express all kinds of toxic chemicals to respond to herbivores. They have a bunch of signaling pathways which are meaningful, and maybe they could produce a kind of experience. They have that trait that I was talking about earlier of being a contained system that can share information with itself, but not with the outside world. So I'm not fully convinced that plants don't have a subjective experience, but I don't have a heck of an idea what that experience is. I suspect it probably does involve some kind of pain in the sense that there are things that plants experience that are negative and that the plant should try to avoid. Now, the plant can't physically recoil, but it can express a bunch of different chemicals to change the behavior to change the structure of the leaf or stem or bark or what have you. But it's certainly less of an obvious experience than the case of an animal, which has pain receptors and a brain, and so we know that it has some kind of experience. Or we don't know, but we can be pretty confident, I think, that it has some kind of experience. So that's the what about plants thing is like dumb, and I'm giving it the rank of dumb. It's a bad argument because it's totally a straw man of the vegan's position, which isn't just that, like, I don't like killing anything, it's that I don't like making things suffer when they don't have to. And the plants don't have to be killed, but they also are not suffering, so I'm not making them suffer. So I'm happy to do this kind of, I'm happy to cut a rock in half. I don't feel kind of morally dubious about that because the rock isn't suffering in any way I can possibly imagine. But if you take the nociceptors out of a Miltank, if you take the brain out of a Miltank, what you're left with is kind of a plant. Not in, like, genetic makeup or in structure, but in, like, signal response. So it might still have automatic, like, breathing and digestion. It just doesn't have thought or aversion or pain. Now, it doesn't have any positive emotions either, but neither do plants. And we don't go around thinking, oh man, it's so unfair for that oak tree that it doesn't get to have a brain. Like, we're not out here thinking we need to put brains in everything, because if the thing had a brain, it would prefer to have a brain. Because the reason that a Miltank that you've lobotomized would prefer to have a brain if you gave it a brain is that the brain would prefer for itself to exist. But the brainless lobotomized Miltank doesn't have the brain, so it doesn't have that impulse. It's just that the brain wants itself to exist. So if you, like, introduce it into the equation, it suddenly wants the Miltank to continue to host it. So I think that it's, like, unclear why that would be a bad thing. Even better if you could modify the Miltank such that they never developed nociceptors or brains. They just had no experience. They kind of grew, and maybe they could eat, do basic eating, and they could breathe, but they never had any experience. They didn't react to anything. They just stood there and they had eat, and they had produce milk and they had die, that would be kind of ideal. It would be ideal for us because it would solve some of the moral dilemma. It would be ideal for the Miltank because it would save it from suffering. And it would actually be ideal for the Miltank's evolution too. I mean, not for the genes that you're removing, but for the Miltank as a whole, the fact that it's not going to suffer means that more humans are going to feel okay with farming it, which means that it's more likely to survive and reproduce, which means that its fitness goes up. The thing about suffering is that evolution doesn't necessitate suffering. You can have evolving systems that don't involve any kind of suffering. It's just that evolution is totally blind to suffering when it doesn't have any selective effect. So if you're a person, right, there are kinds of pain that are really useful to have. If I put my hand on the stove, I want my body to say, ooh, like take the hand away. And then I want it to be so uncomfortable to my brain that I learn never to do it again. That's actually good. If I didn't have that, I'd be getting injured all the time, and my behaviors wouldn't keep me alive as well. Even like stubbing my toe, which is a bad feeling, like stubbing your toe really hurts. It does incentivize you not to stub your toe if you can help it, which is good because having a broken toe, if you did break your toe, would be really, really bad for your survival, especially if you were a sort of bipedal australopith living in Africa a couple million years ago. It's not that evolution wants Miltank to suffer. It's not that it wants them not to suffer, it's just that it doesn't really mind, except insofar as it helps them survive and reproduce. Now, for the Miltank, in this scenario, we humans are handling the reproductive side of it. It doesn't have to worry about that. As long as it keeps tasting good, we're going to keep reproducing it. So it's got that sorted. Which means that there's no longer a selective reason to feel pain, especially since the pain that it's feeling is helping it reproduce. Because if it can tolerate living the kind of life that we want it to live, it's going to be more amenable to letting us make it nice and tasty, and so it's going to be selectively favored. But you can see how the ethical retata, the ethics rat, might object to this. It might say, okay, what you're proposing sounds barbaric. Why don't you instead try to just stop farming Miltank? Like, couldn't we just do that? You know, that would also solve the problem, right? There'd be no more Miltank suffering. But you wouldn't have to do any of this crazy, like, making a meat vegetable stuff. You would actually help the Miltank in a way that it's really dubious if you're doing with your crazy plan. And you'd be able to sleep at night. And I'm here, the utilitarian, kind of saying, yeah, okay, you're right. If we could stop the Miltank factories tomorrow, that would be great. But we can't. There are kind of ecological reasons, evolutionary reasons why that's not going to happen. Because people want to eat Miltank. Like, it's tasty. People want to drink Moomoo Milk. It's great. You buy it in a dozen, it heals 100 HP. You can stand against history if you want, ethics rat, and say that we should just abolish Moomoo Milk. You can say that why don't we just use hyper potions? Why don't we just use oran berries? But the fact is, Moomoo Milks are cheaper and they heal enough HP for the average trainer. And that's what really matters, right? Now we can get around that. We can outlaw them. We can regulate them. But we could also lobotomize the Miltank. I think it's just unclear whether we would be harming anything if we lobotomized the Miltank before they gained any kind of awareness. So the ethics rat and I are going to have to agree to disagree on this one, which is going to be relatively easy for me because I have weasel ethics and I want to kind of, I'm not willing to commit to anything. I'm a bit of a treacherous creature. Whereas the ethics rat has principles, and the ethics rat will die by those principles, for better and for worse. And so now the question comes to you, dear viewer. What do you think? Do you think that we should lobotomize Miltank? Have I convinced you with my rambling argument? I haven't scripted this or planned this in any way, so I don't actually remember all the premises I laid out over the course of this video, and I don't know if they flow together, and I don't know if I stand by them. We'll find out in the editing room, I suppose. So in conclusion, I think that we have a duty to, if we can, lobotomize the Miltank that live on Moomoo Farm, that live in the Maid Cafe, that Whitney uses in her gym. We should lobotomize them, remove all experience of reality, including that of pain, because then we could eat them and drink their milk without guilt. How do you feel about this? Do you disagree with any of my principles that I've laid out? Do you disagree with my conclusion? Do you think that actually this whole thing sounds like a fever dream? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. Maybe you think the ethics rat is right and I'm wrong. Do you side with neither of us? In the vegan community, the word for you, if you're not a vegetarian or a vegan, is a carnist. You're a carnist and you eat meat. Are you a carnist? Do you think that in fact eating meat is fine and animals don't suffer and it's good to kill them? Is that what you believe? Well, I'm not here to tell you that you're wrong. I'm here to boost my engagement. So why don't you just have a fight in the comments with some other people who'll have a fight? Or not. If this video might get 3 views because YouTube will be like, that's way too weird. Like no one's gonna watch this. Or it might get 3 views because why would anyone want to watch this? Either of those are very possible. I'm gonna go edit this now, and probably by the end of the editing phase, I will have looked back on it, thought, wow, this is like a manic fever dream, and I hope this is satire because I don't think it can be real, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, thank you for watching. Oh, I should say, to clear the air, I've got no beef with the dairy farm. They've got all the beef. I have ill will towards specific dairy farmers who have specific opinions, but the institution as a whole, it's fine. I think that Moomoo farms are okay. You know, we know they take care of their milk. They had that sick Miltank, but they were actively looking for people to feed or berries to their sick Miltank to get it back on its feet. So we know that they're good friends. And I think that there is a world where it's okay to have someone who you look after and then murder if you give them a sufficiently good life before you murder them. I think that's sometimes fine. Like, what if you live on a planet where everyone who is over the age of 40 suddenly transforms into a demon, right? In that case, you should probably kill everyone at 39, but make sure that their life is real good up until 39. Anyway, I digress. Some of you are pretty cool. And thank you for all the money you bring to the New Zealand economy. Clean green image, yay, and all that. Okay, good night, everybody, because I am losing my mind.